Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation of Trust. Patrick Hardy had built his life on three pillars: family, loyalty, and strength. At 42, he commanded respect in every room he entered. His construction company, Hardy Foundations, had grown from a one-man operation to a multi-million-dollar empire spanning 3 states. But Patrick's greatest pride wasn't his business. It was his family. 20 years of marriage to Chris Hardy had given him what he thought was everything a man could want. She was beautiful, charming, and the mother of his 18-year-old daughter, Amy. Patrick had met Chris when she was just 19, a small-town girl from Oregon whose father, Russell Bush, ran a failing auto repair shop. Patrick had swept her off her feet, married her within a year, and moved her to his growing empire in Colorado. Patrick's philosophy was simple. Those who earned his trust received his unwavering loyalty, but those who betrayed it faced consequences that would haunt them forever. He'd learned this lesson early from his own father, a steel worker who taught him that a man's word was his bond and his family was his fortress. Chris had always seemed to understand this about her husband. She played the perfect wife role, attending charity galas, hosting dinner parties for his business associates, and maintaining their pristine image in Denver social circles. Amy, their daughter, had inherited Patrick's strong will and Chris's beauty. She was set to start college in the fall, planning to study business to eventually join Hardy Foundations. But beneath the surface of this perfect family portrait, cracks had been forming for months. Patrick had noticed small changes in Chris: secretive phone calls, unexplained absences, new clothes that didn't appear on their credit card statements. His instincts, honed by years of reading people and business deals, told him something was wrong. However, he dismissed these feelings, telling himself that 20 years of marriage had earned Chris the benefit of the doubt. The irony wasn't lost on Patrick that he could read the intentions of corrupt contractors and scheming competitors like an open book, yet he'd chosen to ignore the signs in his own home. Perhaps it was love, or perhaps it was the arrogance of a man who believed his fortress was impenetrable. Trevor Garrison had entered their lives 6 months ago as Chris's new personal trainer. At 35, Trevor possessed the kind of rugged charm that made women forget their vows and men question their own masculinity. He'd moved to Denver from California, claiming he wanted a fresh start after a messy divorce. Patrick had even liked the man initially. Trevor was articulate, seemed professional, and had impressive credentials. What Patrick didn't know was that Trevor specialized in more than fitness training. He was a predator who targeted wealthy, neglected wives, seducing them with attention their husbands were too busy to provide. Trevor had researched the Hardy family extensively before taking the job, knowing exactly what kind of goldmine he'd discovered in Chris. The affair had begun innocently enough: extended training sessions, intimate conversations about Chris's unfulfilled dreams, and gradually escalating physical contact. Trevor was a master manipulator who knew exactly how to make a woman feel desired and understood. He'd convinced Chris that her husband took her for granted, that she deserved passion and excitement. For Chris, the affair represented everything missing from her marriage. Patrick's success had made him increasingly absent, focused on expanding his empire, while she felt like a beautiful decoration in their mansion. Trevor offered her adventure, spontaneity, and the intoxicating feeling of being wanted for more than just her ability to play the perfect wife. Amy, caught between her parents' growing distance, had begun acting out. Her grades suffered, she'd started drinking at parties, and she'd recently been arrested for reckless driving, an incident Patrick had quietly made disappear with a few phone calls. He'd attributed her behavior to typical teenage rebellion, never imagining the chaos brewing beneath his roof. The family's carefully constructed facade was maintained through years of practice. Sunday dinners, family vacations, public appearances, all performed with the precision of seasoned actors. Patrick threw himself deeper into work. Chris lost herself in her secret affair, and Amy spiraled into increasingly dangerous behavior as she sensed the impending explosion. Russell Bush, Chris's father, had been battling cancer for the past year. The old man had never particularly liked Patrick, seeing him as the city slicker who'd stolen his daughter away from small-town Oregon. But Russell was proud, too proud to accept charity from his wealthy son-in-law, even as medical bills mounted and his auto shop struggled to stay afloat. When Russell's condition worsened 2 weeks ago, Patrick had insisted on personally caring for him, seeing it as his duty as a son-in-law. He'd moved into Russell's small house in Bend, Oregon, sleeping on a lumpy couch and helping the stubborn old man through his final days. It was a gesture that Chris had praised publicly, while secretly celebrating the freedom it gave her to intensify her affair with Trevor. During those 2 weeks, Patrick had gained a new perspective on his life. Watching Russell fight his losing battle with dignity and grace made Patrick reflect on what truly mattered. He decided to return home early, planning to surprise Chris and Amy with a renewed commitment to putting family first. He'd even stopped at a jewelry store in Denver, purchasing an expensive necklace for Chris as a symbol of his desire to reconnect. The construction king who could build anything had failed to notice that his own foundation was crumbling. As Patrick drove through Denver's affluent neighborhoods toward his mansion, he felt optimistic about the future. He had no idea that he was about to discover a betrayal so profound it would unleash a darkness within him that even he didn't know existed. The pieces were in place for a collision that would destroy lives and reveal the true nature of everyone involved. Patrick Hardy, the man who never forgave betrayal, was about to face the ultimate test of that principle from the people he loved most. Chapter 2. Cracks in the Foundation. The 2 weeks Patrick spent caring for Russell Bush were transformative in ways he couldn't have anticipated. The old man, despite his illness, possessed a sharp mind and an even sharper tongue. During long nights when pain kept Russell awake, he'd regaled Patrick with stories of his younger days, his dreams, and his disappointments. "You know what your problem is, Patrick?" Russell had said during one of their late-night conversations, his voice weakened by chemotherapy, but his eyes still piercing. "You think providing for someone is the same as loving them. Your wife doesn't need another diamond bracelet. She needs a husband who sees her as more than a trophy." Patrick had dismissed the comment at the time, attributing it to Russell's pain medication and general dislike of him. But the words lingered, especially when Russell continued his brutal honesty. "Chris was never meant for this city life you've given her. She was a wild girl, full of dreams and passion. You've turned her into a museum piece, beautiful to look at but not allowed to be touched or moved." The irony was that while Patrick received this unwanted wisdom about his marriage, Chris was 300 miles away, living out the very passion Russell described, just not with her husband. In Denver, Chris had grown bolder during Patrick's absence. Trevor no longer limited their encounters to hotel rooms and gym sessions. He'd been staying at the Hardy Mansion, sleeping in the guest room officially, but spending his nights in the master bedroom. They'd grown careless, leaving evidence of their affairs scattered throughout the house like breadcrumbs waiting to be discovered. Amy had initially been appalled by her mother's behavior. She'd confronted Chris during the first week of Patrick's absence, threatening to call her father and expose the affair. But Chris had manipulated her daughter with devastating effectiveness. "Your father doesn't love me anymore, Amy," Chris had wept, playing the victim with Academy Award-worthy performance. "He's married to his business, not to me. Trevor makes me feel alive again. Don't you want your mother to be happy?" The manipulation had worked partially because Amy was already struggling with her own issues. Her recent arrest had left her feeling guilty and rebellious simultaneously. Her relationship with Patrick had grown strained as she'd begun to see him as an authoritarian figure more than a loving father. When Chris painted Patrick as the neglectful husband, it resonated with Amy's own feelings of being overlooked in favor of business priorities. But the final nail in Amy's resistance came when Trevor turned his manipulative charm on her. He convinced Amy that she was mature beyond her years, that she understood adult complexities her father couldn't grasp. He'd filled her head with poison about Patrick being controlling and old-fashioned, while positioning himself as the cool, understanding figure who truly got both mother and daughter. "Your mom deserves happiness, Amy," Trevor had said during one of their conversations by the pool. And you deserve parents who are truly in love, not just going through the motions. Sometimes people need to make difficult choices to find their authentic selves. Trevor's greatest talent wasn't seduction. It was psychological manipulation. He'd identified each family member's weaknesses and exploited them masterfully. With Chris, he'd targeted her feelings of neglect and desire for excitement. With Amy, he'd appealed to her teenage rebellion and need to feel sophisticated. As the days passed, the affair intensified beyond physical betrayal. Chris began sharing intimate details about Patrick's business, his weaknesses, his fears. She revealed his bank account information, his business strategies, even his passwords. Love affairs often involve emotional spillage, but this went far beyond pillow talk. Chris was essentially handing Trevor a roadmap to her husband's destruction. Trevor, for his part, was already planning his next moves. He convinced Chris that they should be together permanently, but he needed to ensure he wouldn't lose access to the hearty fortune in the process. He'd begun researching divorce laws, Patrick's business vulnerabilities, and ways to maximize Chris's settlement. His endgame wasn't just stealing another man's wife. It was destroying the man entirely and taking everything he'd built. The transformation in both women was remarkable. Chris, who'd been the picture of elegant restraint for 20 years, became wild and reckless. She'd started drinking heavily, making impulsive purchases, and treating the household staff with increasing disdain. The mask of perfection she'd worn for 2 decades was finally cracking, revealing someone Patrick had never truly known. Amy's changes were equally dramatic. She'd gone from being Daddy's little girl to actively participating in the deception against him. She'd learned to lie convincingly, to cover for her mother's absences, and to redirect her father's questions during their phone calls. The guilt of betraying Patrick warred with her anger toward him, creating a volatile emotional cocktail that made her increasingly unpredictable. The mansion itself began to reflect the moral decay occurring within its walls. Rooms that had always been meticulously maintained showed signs of neglect. The housekeeper, Maria, had been dismissed suddenly by Chris, who claimed they needed privacy during this difficult time with Russell's illness. In reality, Chris couldn't risk having witnesses to the affair. Trevor had also begun establishing himself as more than just a guest. He'd moved personal items into the house, started answering the phone when Patrick called, and even began making suggestions about redecorating. His audacity was breathtaking, but it served a purpose. He was psychologically claiming territory, making himself indispensable to Chris while simultaneously erasing Patrick's presence from his own home. The neighborhood began to notice changes too. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman next door, observed strange cars coming and going at odd hours. She'd seen Chris and Trevor together in compromising situations in the backyard, though she'd initially assumed Trevor was just a very friendly trainer. The postman noticed that mail was piling up, that the usually pristine landscaping was becoming overgrown. Meanwhile, in Oregon, Patrick was experiencing his own transformation. Caring for Russell had reconnected him with his own mortality and values. He'd spent hours reflecting on his marriage, his relationship with Amy, and his priorities. He'd made mental plans to scale back his business involvement, to take Chris on a second honeymoon, to be more present for Amy's final year before college. Russell's death came on a Tuesday morning, peaceful but still devastating. Despite their complicated relationship, Patrick had grown to respect the old man's honest perspective on life. As he arranged the funeral and settled Russell's affairs, Patrick felt a sense of duty fulfilled and looked forward to returning home to begin rebuilding his family relationships. The final irony was that as Patrick drove home with renewed hope for his marriage, Chris was in their bedroom with Trevor, planning how to ask for a divorce. She convinced herself that she'd fallen truly in love for the first time in her life, and that Patrick would eventually understand. In her selfishness, she'd completely underestimated the man she'd lived with for 20 years. Patrick Hardy was about to come home to a house that was no longer his, to a family that had already betrayed him, and to a life that had been systematically dismantled in his absence. The foundation he'd spent decades building was about to collapse, and the man who emerged from the rubble would be someone none of them recognized. Chapter 3. The Moment of Truth. Patrick's Mercedes pulled into the circular driveway of his mansion at 9:47 p.m. on a Thursday night. He'd driven straight through from Oregon, fueled by grief for Russell and anticipation of reuniting with his family. The house was ablaze with lights, which surprised him since Chris usually preferred dimmer lighting in the evenings. Several cars were parked in the driveway, vehicles he didn't recognize. His first thought was that Chris might be hosting one of her charity committee meetings, though he couldn't remember any events scheduled for tonight. Patrick grabbed his overnight bag and the jewelry box containing Chris's surprise necklace, walking toward the front door with tired but hopeful steps. The front door was unlocked, which immediately set off alarm bells in Patrick's mind. Despite living in an affluent neighborhood, he'd always insisted on proper security protocols. As he stepped into the foyer, he could hear music and laughter coming from the back of the house, sounds of celebration that seemed inappropriate given Russell's recent death. Patrick set down his bags and followed the noise through his own home, feeling increasingly like an intruder. The living room showed signs of recent partying: empty wine bottles, scattered clothing, cushions thrown carelessly on the floor. His home, usually maintained to museum standards, looked like a fraternity house after a weekend bender. As he approached the sliding glass doors leading to the pool area, Patrick could see figures in the water and around the deck. What he witnessed next would be burned into his memory forever. Chris was in the pool with Trevor, locked in a passionate embrace that left no doubt about their relationship. Amy sat at the pool's edge, drinking wine and laughing as she watched her mother betray her father. But it wasn't just the physical affair that shattered Patrick. It was the complete transformation of his family. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a recent development. The ease with which they interacted, the comfort level, the way Amy participated in the celebration. This had been going on for months, possibly longer. Patrick stood frozen behind the glass door, watching his world collapse in real time. 20 years of marriage, 18 years of fatherhood, a lifetime of trust and love, all revealed to be an elaborate deception. But what cut deepest was Amy's laughter. His little girl, whom he'd protected and provided for, was celebrating his betrayal. Trevor noticed Patrick first. Instead of showing shame or fear, he smiled and waved, as if greeting an old friend. The audacity was breathtaking. Chris followed Trevor's gaze and saw her husband standing in the doorway. For a moment, her face showed genuine shock and fear. But then something shifted in her expression. Defiance replaced shame. "Patrick," she called out, not bothering to separate from Trevor. "You're early." Amy's reaction was the most devastating. When she saw her father, her laughter died, but her eyes showed no remorse, only irritation at being caught. The daughter who'd once been his greatest joy now looked at him like he was an unwelcome intruder in his own home. Patrick slid open the door and stepped onto the deck. The sound seemed to echo in the sudden silence. 3 pairs of eyes watched him, calculating his next move. But Patrick had perfected the art of emotional control in countless business negotiations. His face remained impassive as he surveyed the scene. "Trevor," Patrick said calmly, his voice carrying none of the rage burning inside him. "I trust you've been taking good care of my family." Trevor, emboldened by what he mistook for Patrick's weakness, actually laughed. "Better than you have, apparently." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Patrick had faced down union bosses, corrupt politicians, and ruthless competitors, but none of those confrontations had prepared him for this moment. His family, the people he'd built his entire life around, had not just betrayed him, but were now openly mocking him. Chris finally found her voice. "Patrick, we need to talk. Things have changed while you were gone." "Have they?" Patrick asked, his tone still eerily calm. He pulled out his phone and began scrolling through what looked like emails, though he was actually buying time to process the magnitude of the betrayal. Amy, perhaps sensing the tension, tried to defuse the situation with teenage logic. "Dad, you can't be that surprised. You never hear anyway. Mom deserves to be happy." The words hit Patrick like physical blows. His own daughter, defending her mother's affair, reducing 20 years of sacrifice and love to a simple matter of presence versus absence. But what Amy didn't understand was that she'd just sealed her own fate in Patrick's mind. Betrayal was one thing, but defending the betrayal was unforgivable. "I see," Patrick said quietly. He looked at each of them in turn, his wife, his daughter, the man who'd invaded his home and destroyed his family. "Russell died this morning. I thought you should know." The announcement created a moment of awkward silence. Chris's face showed a flicker of genuine emotion. Her father was dead, and she'd been celebrating with her lover instead of mourning. But the moment passed quickly, replaced by defensive anger. "You could have called," she said, though they all knew Patrick had tried calling multiple times over the past few days, only to be sent a voicemail or given brief, dismissive conversations. "I wanted to tell you in person," Patrick replied. "I wanted to come home to my family." The emphasis on my family was subtle but unmistakable. Trevor, either incredibly stupid or incredibly arrogant, chose that moment to assert his dominance. "Patrick, look, this is awkward for everyone. Maybe you should stay in a hotel tonight. Give us all time to process this situation like adults." The suggestion that Patrick should leave his own home might have been the final straw for another man. But Patrick Hardy had built his fortune by thinking strategically, by planning his moves carefully, and by never acting on impulse when the stakes were high. He looked at Trevor for a long moment, memorizing every detail of the man's face. "You're right," Patrick said finally. "This is very awkward." He turned and walked back toward the house, leaving 3 very confused people behind him. In the master bedroom, his bedroom, Patrick found evidence of Trevor's extended stay. Men's clothing in the closet, toiletries in the bathroom, even family photos turned face down on the nightstands. The violation was complete and systematic. They hadn't just betrayed him, they'd erased him. Patrick packed a small bag while his mind raced through possibilities. He could confront them with violence. He was certainly capable of it. He could call his lawyers immediately and begin divorce proceedings. He could throw them all out of his house tonight. But none of those options satisfied the cold fury building inside him. As he prepared to leave, Patrick's eyes fell on the jewelry box containing Chris's surprise necklace. He opened it and looked at the diamonds that had cost him more than most people earned in a year. Then he closed the box and placed it carefully in his bag. Someday, he might find a use for it. Before leaving, Patrick made one stop in his home office. He had important documents to secure, bank accounts to protect, and plans to make. His family thought they'd won by choosing honesty over deception. They had no idea they'd just declared war on a man who'd never lost a fight that mattered. As Patrick drove away from his mansion for what he suspected might be the last time, he felt something he hadn't experienced in 20 years: absolute clarity. The foundation of his life had crumbled, but foundations could be rebuilt. And sometimes, before you could build something new, you had to completely demolish what came before. Behind him, in the house that was no longer his home, 3 people celebrated what they thought was their victory. They had no idea that Patrick Hardy had just transformed from a devoted husband and father into something far more dangerous: a man with nothing left to lose and everything to gain from their destruction. Chapter 4: The Awakening. Patrick checked into the Ritz-Carlton downtown, though sleep was impossible. He spent the night in the hotel's business center, using secure internet connections to begin what would become the most important project of his life. By dawn, he had a clear picture of his enemy's vulnerabilities and the beginnings of a plan that would make his business competitors' downfalls look merciful in comparison. His first discovery was that Trevor Garrison's background was even more sordid than Patrick had imagined. The man wasn't just a predatory personal trainer. He was a professional con artist with a string of wealthy victims across multiple states. Trevor's real name was Trevor Garrison Michaels, and he'd been married 4 times, each marriage ending with substantial settlements that funded his lifestyle. He'd been sued twice for fraud and once for extortion, though charges had been dropped when his victims chose to pay him off rather than endure public humiliation. But Trevor had made a critical error in choosing the Hardy family as his latest target. Unlike his previous victims, lonely widows and neglected wives with inherited wealth, Patrick Hardy was a self-made man who understood power, leverage, and the art of war. The second revelation was even more devastating. Amy had been aware of her mother's affair for months and had actively participated in concealing it. Patrick found text messages on a family phone plan that revealed the depth of his daughter's betrayal. She hadn't just known about the affair. She'd helped orchestrate it, providing alibis, covering for unexplained absences, and even warning Chris when Patrick's business trips were delayed. One particular message thread between Amy and her friend Jessica revealed the true extent of the conspiracy. Amy, Dad's suspicious about Mom's new workout schedule. Think I should distract him with my college drama again. Jessica, your mom's trainer is so hot though. Can't blame her for wanting some excitement. Amy, Trevor's actually really cool. He gets that Dad is basically an absent workaholic. Mom deserves better. Jessica, are you seriously supporting your mom's affair? Amy, I'm supporting my mom's happiness. Dad will figure it out eventually, and honestly, maybe it's for the best. Reading those messages, Patrick felt something inside him die completely. The last vestiges of his old life. The loving father, the devoted husband, the man who believed in forgiveness and second chances, simply ceased to exist. By 6 a.m., Patrick had compiled a comprehensive dossier on Trevor Garrison Michaels. Financial records, criminal history, immigration status. Trevor was actually Canadian, living in the U.S. on an expired visa, previous victims, and most importantly, current vulnerabilities. Trevor owed substantial debts to some very unforgiving people, had outstanding warrants in 2 states, and was currently being investigated by the IRS for tax evasion. But Patrick's most valuable discovery came from Trevor's own arrogance. The man had been documenting his conquest of the Hardy family on social media and private forums dedicated to lifestyle coaching, a euphemism for wealthy women seduction. Trevor had shared intimate details about Chris's vulnerabilities, Patrick's business secrets, and even Amy's emotional manipulation. He'd essentially created a detailed confession of his crimes, thinking himself untouchable. Chris's betrayal ran deeper than adultery. Patrick discovered that she'd been accessing his business accounts, sharing confidential information about upcoming deals, and even attempting to transfer funds to accounts Trevor had helped her establish. What she didn't realize was that Patrick had always maintained hidden safeguards on their shared finances. Every transaction was monitored, every unusual activity flagged. He'd been protecting their money from external threats, while his wife plotted to steal it from within. At 7 a.m., Patrick's phone rang. It was Chris, her voice a mixture of fake concern and barely concealed irritation. Patrick, where are you? We need to talk about this situation rationally. I'm exactly where I need to be, Patrick replied calmly. How are you feeling about your father's death, Chris? I know how close you two were. The question caught her off guard. She'd been preparing for accusations about the affair, not reminders of her father's death. That's not fair, Patrick. You know I'm grieving. Are you? Because last night, you seemed to be celebrating something entirely different. There was a long pause. When Chris spoke again, her voice had changed. The pretense of the wounded wife was gone, replaced by cold calculation. Patrick, I want a divorce. Trevor and I are in love, and this marriage has been over for years. We can do this amicably, or we can make it ugly. Your choice. Amicably, Patrick repeated. After 20 years of marriage, you think there's an amicable way to dissolve our life together for your personal trainer? He's not just a personal trainer, and you know it. Trevor understands me in ways you never have. He makes me feel alive. I'm sure he does. Where's Amy? Amy supports our decision. She's old enough to understand that people grow apart, that marriage isn't a prison sentence. Patrick closed his eyes, feeling the last door to reconciliation slam shut. I see. And has Amy chosen which parent she wants to live with during this transition? She wants to stay with me. With us. Patrick, you have to understand. I understand perfectly, Patrick interrupted. More perfectly than you can imagine. After ending the call, Patrick made his first tactical move. He called his head of security, Malcolm Dunham, a former Marine who'd worked for Hardy Foundations for 8 years. Malcolm had always been more than an employee. He was one of the few people Patrick trusted completely. Malcolm, I need you to meet me at the downtown office. And Malcolm, we're going to war. Malcolm Dunham had served 3 tours in Afghanistan before joining Patrick's company. He understood warfare, both foreign and domestic. When Patrick explained the situation, Malcolm's expression didn't change, but his eyes hardened with military precision. "What do you need, boss?" "I need Trevor Garrison to disappear from my family's life. Permanently. But I need it to be his choice, not our coercion. Can you make that happen?" Malcolm smiled for the first time in their conversation. "Trevor Garrison, or Trevor Garrison Michaels, because I've already run a preliminary background check, and this guy has more problems than he realizes." "You've already investigated him?" "Boss, the moment a strange man starts spending time around your family, I investigate. It's what you pay me for. This particular guy, let's just say he's borrowed money from some very unfriendly people in Las Vegas." Patrick felt a cold satisfaction. How unfriendly? The kind who break legs first and ask questions later. Apparently, Trevor convinced some mob-connected loan sharks to invest in his fitness empire about 6 months ago. He was supposed to open a chain of high-end gyms. Instead, he used the money to fund his lifestyle and his pursuit of your wife. How much does he owe? $800,000 plus interest. They've been looking for him for 3 weeks. Patrick was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. "Malcolm, what would happen if these people discovered Trevor's current location?" "They'd collect their debt, one way or another. And if Trevor suddenly came into a large amount of cash, say, through a divorce settlement, would that solve his problems?" Malcolm shook his head. "These aren't the kind of people who forget being played for fools. Money might buy him time, but they'd want their pound of flesh too." Patrick smiled for the first time since discovering the affair. "Then we need to make sure Trevor never gets the chance to run with any divorce settlement money." As Patrick and Malcolm planned Trevor's downfall, they had no idea that their conversation was being recorded. Amy Hardy, guilty about her betrayal but still loyal to her mother, had placed a listening device in Patrick's office days before his return from Oregon. Trevor had convinced her it was necessary to protect Chris from Patrick's potential violence. The recording would prove to be a critical mistake, not because it would save Trevor and Chris, but because it would give Patrick the final piece of evidence he needed to justify what was coming next. His own daughter had chosen to spy on him for his enemies. There would be no mercy, no forgiveness, and no second chances. The war for the Hardy family's soul was about to begin, and Patrick Hardy intended to be the only survivor. Chapter 5. Gathering Intelligence. Amy Hardy sat in her BMW outside a coffee shop in downtown Denver, her hands shaking as she replayed the recording she'd made of her father's conversation with Malcolm. Trevor had convinced her that Patrick might become violent when confronted with the affair, that recording his private conversations was necessary to protect her mother. But what she'd heard terrified her. Her father, the man who'd taught her to ride a bike, who'd attended every school play and soccer game, who'd patiently helped her with homework, had spoken about making Trevor disappear with the cold detachment of a stranger. The Patrick Hardy on that recording wasn't the devoted father she remembered, but something far more dangerous. Amy's first instinct was to warn Trevor and her mother immediately, but as she sat in her car, conflicted emotions warred within her. Despite everything, Patrick was still her father. The man on the recording might be capable of terrible things, but he was also the man who'd built an empire to provide for his family, who'd spent 2 weeks caring for a dying man he barely tolerated out of duty and love. For the first time since the affair began, Amy allowed herself to truly consider what they'd done to Patrick. She'd been so caught up in Trevor's manipulations and her mother's excitement that she'd never fully grasped the magnitude of their betrayal. They hadn't just broken Patrick's heart, they'd systematically destroyed his entire world while he was caring for his dying father-in-law. But Amy's moment of moral clarity was interrupted by Trevor's arrival at the coffee shop. He slid into the passenger seat of her car, his usual charming smile immediately fading when he saw her expression. "What's wrong, sweetheart? You look like you've seen a ghost." Amy handed him the recording device with trembling fingers. "I think we're in trouble, Trevor. Real trouble." As Trevor listened to the recording, his face underwent a dramatic transformation. The confident predator who'd seduced mother and daughter alike was replaced by a man who understood that he'd seriously underestimated his opponent. Patrick Hardy wasn't the absent, workaholic husband Trevor had expected. He was a strategic thinker with dangerous resources and apparently no moral limitations when it came to protecting what was his. "This is bad," Trevor muttered, his mind racing through possible escape routes. "This is very bad. What are we going to do?" Amy asked, her voice small and frightened. Trevor's survival instincts kicked in immediately. His first thought was self-preservation, not protecting the family he'd helped destroy. "We need to accelerate our timeline. Your mother needs to file for divorce immediately, before your father can hide assets or worse." "Worse? Trevor, what does that mean?" Trevor looked at Amy, really looked at her for the first time, and saw not a sophisticated co-conspirator, but a frightened teenager who was in way over her head. His manipulation of her had been so complete that she'd never considered the real-world consequences of her actions. Now reality was crashing down around all of them. "Amy, listen to me carefully. Your father is angrier than we anticipated. We need to be smart about this, move quickly, and most importantly, we need to stick together. Can you do that?" Amy nodded, though her faith in Trevor was beginning to crack. "Should we call the police? If Dad's planning to hurt you?" "No." Trevor's response was immediate and sharp. "We can't involve law enforcement. It would complicate everything." What he didn't tell Amy was that the last thing he needed was police attention given his outstanding warrants and visa issues. Meanwhile, at Hardy Foundation's headquarters, Patrick was orchestrating a masterpiece of strategic warfare. He'd assembled a team of specialists, private investigators, forensic accountants, cybersecurity experts, and attorneys, each sworn to absolute secrecy. To the outside world, Patrick appeared to be handling his father-in-law's death and dealing with family matters. In reality, he was building a case that would systematically destroy his enemies. His first target was Trevor's financial vulnerability. Patrick's investigators had located Trevor's creditors in Las Vegas. Specifically, a group led by a man named Vinny Torino, whose loan sharking operation was legendary for its efficiency and brutality. Patrick arranged a meeting through intermediaries, presenting himself as a concerned citizen with information about a fugitive debtor. The meeting took place in a private dining room, an upscale steakhouse. Vinny Torino was exactly what Patrick expected, a man who'd built his reputation on making problems disappear permanently. But Vinny was also a businessman who respected other successful men, especially those who approached him with profitable opportunities. "So you're telling me this Trevor Michaels is hiding out in Denver, playing house with some rich man's wife?" Vinny asked, cutting into his steak with surgical precision. "I'm telling you that Trevor Garrison Michaels owes you a substantial sum of money and has been living under an assumed name while seducing wealthy women to fund his lifestyle. What you do with that information is entirely your business." "I need more time," Trevor pleaded, his charming facade cracking under the pressure. "I'm in the middle of a business deal that will net me enough to pay you back with interest." "A business deal?" Vinny repeated slowly. "You mean divorcing this woman and stealing half her husband's money?" Trevor's shock at Vinny's detailed knowledge was evident. He'd assumed his activities in Denver were secret, but clearly, someone had provided very specific information about his situation. "It's not stealing," Trevor protested weakly. "Chris is entitled to her share of the marital assets." Vinny laughed, the sound devoid of humor. "You're a real piece of work, Trevor. You seduce another man's wife, destroy his family, steal his money, and call a business deal. I almost admire the audacity." One of Vinny's men stepped forward, rolling up his sleeves in a way that suggested violence was imminent. But Vinny held up a hand, stopping him. "Here's what's going to happen, Trevor. You're going to pay me what you owe, plus a penalty for making me chase you across 3 states. If this divorce settlement comes through, you'll give me everything you receive, and we'll call it even. If the settlement doesn't happen, or if you try to run again, my associates will express their disappointment in ways that will leave permanent reminders of your poor judgment. What if the settlement isn't enough to cover what I owe?" Trevor asked, though he already knew the answer. "Then you'll learn why people in my business don't default on their obligations," Vinny replied matter-of-factly. "But I'm an optimist, Trevor. I believe this Patrick Hardy fellow is wealthy enough to cover your debts, assuming you can convince his wife to take him for everything he's worth. The message was clear. Trevor's survival depended entirely on the success of his scheme against Patrick. There was no escape route, no way to cut his losses and run. He was trapped between his criminal creditors and the man whose life he'd destroyed, with nowhere to go but forward. As Vinny's men released Trevor back into the Denver streets, he felt the full weight of his situation crushing down on him. Patrick Hardy wasn't just a cuckolded husband anymore. He was an existential threat whose mere existence stood between Trevor and a very painful death. Trevor returned to the Hardy mansion, shaken and desperate. Chris immediately noticed his agitation, the barely controlled fear in his eyes, the way he kept checking the windows and doors as if expecting an attack. "What's wrong?" she asked, though part of her already suspected the answer. Trevor had always been vague about his past, deflecting questions with charm and misdirection. "We need to accelerate everything," Trevor said, his usual confidence replaced by barely contained panic. "The divorce, the settlement, all of it. We can't wait any longer." "Trevor, you're scaring me. What happened?" For the first time since their affair began, Trevor told Chris the complete truth about his situation. The failed businesses, the criminal associates, the $800,000 he owed to people who settled debts with violence. Chris listened in growing horror as she realized that the sophisticated man she'd fallen in love with was actually a con artist running from dangerous criminals. "You used me," Chris said, the words barely above a whisper. "This whole thing, our relationship, it was all about the money." "No," Trevor protested, though his desperation made the denial unconvincing. "I love you, Chris, but I also need you. We need each other. If we can get through this divorce quickly, we can pay off my debts and start fresh together." Chris felt the foundation of her new life crumbling just as surely as her marriage had. The passionate romance that had justified destroying her family was revealed to be a calculated deception. But she was too deep into the betrayal to turn back now. Patrick would never forgive her, and her only hope for any kind of future was to see the divorce through and hope Trevor's love was at least partially genuine. "How much do you owe?" she asked quietly. "With interest and penalties?" "Almost $1 million. Chris closed her eyes, calculating their chances. Patrick's net worth was substantial, but Colorado was not a community property state. Her settlement would depend on the judge's discretion and the skill of her attorney. $1 million was achievable, but it would require taking Patrick for everything she could get. "We'll need the best divorce attorney in the state," she said finally, "and we'll need to move fast before Patrick can hide assets." What neither Chris nor Trevor realized was that their conversation was being recorded by the same surveillance system Trevor had convinced Amy to help disable weeks earlier. Patrick had never actually shut down the security system. He'd simply made it appear offline while continuing to monitor his home remotely. From his hotel room, Patrick watched his wife and her lover plan his financial destruction with the same detached interest he might observe a competitor's boardroom strategy. Their desperation was palpable, their fear was growing, and their options were narrowing exactly as he'd planned. The first phase of Patrick's revenge was complete. Trevor was trapped between criminal creditors and an impossible timeline, while Chris was finally beginning to understand the true nature of the man she'd chosen over her husband. But this was only the beginning. Patrick's phone buzzed with a text from Malcolm. "Package delivered. Target received message. Recommend proceeding to Phase 2. Patrick smiled coldly as he typed his response. "Proceed as planned. No mercy." The war for Patrick Hardy's soul was entering its most brutal phase, and his enemies were about to learn that the man they betrayed was far more dangerous than they'd ever imagined. Chapter 7. The Trap Springs. Amy Hardy paced frantically around her bedroom, her phone pressed to her ear as she left her fourth voicemail for her father. Trevor's revelation about his criminal debts and the violent men hunting him had shattered her last illusions about the affair. What she thought was a romantic rebellion against her father's authority was actually a criminal conspiracy that could destroy their entire family. "Dad, please call me back," she whispered into the phone. "I know you hate me right now, but we need to talk. There are things you don't know about Trevor, dangerous things. Please, I'm scared." But Patrick wasn't taking Amy's calls. He was 3 blocks away from his own home, sitting in Malcolm's surveillance van, watching his daughter's breakdown through hidden cameras while feeling absolutely nothing. The caring father who might have rushed to comfort his frightened child was gone, replaced by a strategist who viewed Amy's panic as confirmation that his plan was working perfectly. "She's finally starting to understand," Malcolm observed, watching Amy through the monitors. "The kid's scared out of her mind." "She should be," Patrick replied coldly. "She made her choice when she decided to spy on me for my enemies. Actions have consequences." Malcolm had known Patrick for 8 years, but he'd never seen this version of the man. Calculating, ruthless, completely devoid of the warmth that had once made him such an effective leader. "Boss, she's still your daughter." Patrick's expression didn't change. "No, my daughter died the moment she chose to betray me for Trevor Garrison. The girl in that house is just another enemy who happens to share my DNA." Vinny smiled, the expression somehow managing to be both charming and terrifying. "You know, Mr. Hardy, I like you. You're a man who understands that certain problems require certain solutions. This Trevor has cost me money and respect. Both are commodities I value highly. I'm sure you'll handle the situation appropriately," Patrick said, sliding a folder across the table. "That contains Trevor's current address, daily routine, and the locations where he's most vulnerable to approach. And what do you want in return for this information?" "I want Trevor Garrison to realize that Denver is no longer a safe place for him to conduct business. I want him to understand that his current lifestyle is unsustainable. How you convey that message is entirely up to you." Vinny studied Patrick with newfound respect. "You're not asking me to kill him. I'm asking you to collect what you're owed and ensure he understands the consequences of his choices. If Trevor chooses to leave Denver permanently to avoid further complications, that would be an unfortunate but understandable decision on his part." As Patrick drove back to his hotel, he felt a cold satisfaction. Trevor's past was about to catch up with him in the most violent way possible. It would appear to be simple criminal justice rather than Patrick's orchestrated revenge. By the time Vinny's people finished with Trevor, the man would be begging to leave Colorado, assuming he was still capable of begging. But Patrick's plans extended far beyond Trevor. He discovered that Chris had been sharing confidential information about his business deals, potentially costing him millions in competitive advantages. She'd also attempted to access trust funds established for Amy's education, money that was legally protected but vulnerable to someone with inside knowledge of account numbers and passwords. Most damaging of all, Patrick had uncovered evidence that Chris and Trevor had been planning their escape for months. They'd opened joint accounts in the Cayman Islands, researched states with favorable divorce laws, and even consulted with attorneys about maximizing Chris's settlement while minimizing her tax obligations. This wasn't a passionate affair that had gotten out of hand. It was a calculated theft disguised as romance. The final piece of Patrick's intelligence gathering came from an unexpected source: the housekeeper, Maria, whom Chris had dismissed. Maria had worked for the Hardy family for 12 years and had witnessed the affair's development firsthand. More importantly, she kept detailed records of the household's activities, including photographs and videos she'd taken to document valuable items for insurance purposes. "Mr. Patrick," Maria said during their private meeting, tears streaming down her face. "I tried to tell you, but Mrs. Chris, she made me promise to stay quiet. She said you knew about Mr. Trevor, that it was arrangement you approved." The photographs Maria provided were devastating evidence of the affair's duration and scope. They showed Trevor living in the Hardy mansion as early as 3 months ago, long before Patrick had left for Oregon. They documented Amy's participation in the deception, including images of her covering security cameras and disposing of evidence that might reveal Trevor's presence. But the most damaging evidence came from security footage Maria had secretly downloaded before being dismissed. The videos showed Chris and Trevor in Patrick's home office, accessing his computer, photographing documents, and even discussing specific business deals they planned to exploit. "They thought I was just cleaning lady who didn't understand English very well," Maria explained. "But I heard everything. They plan to take everything from you, Mr. Patrick. Your wife, She said you deserve to lose everything because you never appreciated what you had. As Patrick reviewed the evidence, he felt his transformation complete itself. The loving husband and father was gone, replaced by something harder and infinitely more dangerous. Chris, Trevor, and Amy had declared war on him, and now they would learn why Patrick Hardy had never lost a fight that mattered. The first phase of his revenge was about to begin, and none of his enemies had any idea what was coming for them. Chapter 6: The First Strike. Vincent Torino's men found Trevor Garrison at 6:45 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, just as he was leaving the Hardy mansion for his usual run through the affluent Cherrywood neighborhood. The encounter was swift, professional, and absolutely terrifying for Trevor, who found himself surrounded by three very large, very serious men who knew exactly who he was and why they were there. Trevor Garrison Michaels, the lead man, said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that brooked no argument. Mr. Torino would like a word. Trevor's blood turned to ice. He'd been running from Vinny's people for months, constantly looking over his shoulder, but the wealthy Denver suburb had felt like sanctuary. The realization that his past had caught up with him in the place he felt safest was psychologically devastating. I don't know what you're talking about. Trevor tried to bluff, but his voice betrayed his terror. $873,000, plus interest, the man continued calmly. That's what you owe for the gym equipment and startup capital you borrowed 6 months ago. Mr. Torino has been very patient, but patience has its limits. The men escorted Trevor to a black SUV parked 3 blocks away, far enough from the Hardy mansion to avoid witnesses, but close enough to drive home the point that nowhere was safe. The 20-minute ride to an industrial warehouse on the outskirts of Denver was conducted in absolute silence, giving Trevor plenty of time to contemplate his rapidly deteriorating situation. Vinny Torino was waiting in the warehouse, surrounded by exercise equipment that looked suspiciously similar to what Trevor had promised to purchase with the borrowed money. The irony wasn't lost on either man. "Trevor, my friend," Vinny said, his tone conversational, but his eyes cold as winter. "I've been looking for you. Imagine my surprise when I learned you've been living in luxury with some rich man's wife instead of building the fitness empire you promised me." Trevor tried to maintain his composure, falling back on the charm that had served him so well with wealthy women. "Vinny, I can explain. The Denver market required more research than anticipated, but I'm close to securing the financing we discussed." Vinny's backhand across Trevor's face was swift and practiced, cutting off the explanation mid-sentence. "Don't insult my intelligence with more lies. I know exactly what you've been doing, where you've been living, and who you've been fucking. The question is, how are you going to pay me back?" Inside the mansion, Chris was experiencing her own crisis of faith. Trevor's criminal history and the very real threat of violence had forced her to confront the reality of what she'd done. She destroyed a 20-year marriage for a man who'd seduced her as part of a financial scheme. The sophisticated romance she'd thought she was living was actually a trashy con game, and she was just another mark. But Chris's survival instincts were stronger than her guilt. She'd burned every bridge with Patrick, and retreat was impossible. Her only option was to push forward with a divorce and hope she could extract enough money to satisfy Trevor's debts and secure some kind of future for herself. She'd already contacted Denver's most aggressive divorce attorney, Harrison Blackstone, known for his ability to extract maximum settlements from wealthy husbands. Blackstone had reviewed her case and expressed confidence that she could walk away with at least 40% of Patrick's assets, possibly more if they could prove emotional abandonment or other forms of marital misconduct. "The key is moving fast," Blackstone had advised during their consultation. "If your husband is as smart as you say, he's already taking steps to protect his assets. We need to file before he can hide everything in offshore accounts or business structures." What Chris didn't know was that Harrison Blackstone was one of Patrick's oldest friends, having served as legal counsel for Hardy Foundation since its early days. The attorney had called Patrick immediately after Chris's consultation, providing detailed information about her strategy and timeline. "She wants to file tomorrow," Blackstone had reported, claiming irreconcilable differences and seeking 50-50 asset division plus spousal support. She's also requesting immediate possession of the marital home. Perfect, Patrick had replied. File whatever paperwork she wants. Give her exactly what she's asking for. Blackstone was confused by Patrick's response. You want me to roll over? Patrick, she could take you for millions. Harrison, trust me on this. File the papers, begin discovery. Do everything exactly as if you were representing her interests instead of mine. But make sure every document, every financial disclosure, every piece of evidence she provides goes through you first. Now, as Trevor frantically made phone calls trying to negotiate an extension with Vinnie Torino's people, and Chris prepared to destroy her marriage legally, Patrick was implementing the most brilliant aspect of his revenge plan. He was going to give them exactly what they wanted, and it would destroy them completely. The divorce papers were filed on Wednesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, Chris had temporary possession of the mansion. Trevor was breathing easier, believing his financial salvation was at hand, and Amy was cautiously optimistic that maybe the family could survive this crisis after all. None of them realized they were walking into the most sophisticated trap Patrick had ever constructed. The first sign of trouble came when Chris tried to access the family's primary bank accounts. Despite the divorce filing, she discovered that she no longer had access to most of their liquid assets. Patrick had moved the money, but legally, transferring funds to accounts that predated their marriage, business accounts protected by corporate structures, and investment vehicles that were technically separate from marital assets. He can't do this, Chris protested to Blackstone during an emergency meeting. We had joint accounts. I should have access. He moved the money before the filing. Blackstone explained, his expression grave. Technically, he hasn't violated any court orders because the accounts he transferred from weren't specifically protected by the temporary restraining order. So I'm broke. Not broke, but cash poor until we can force disclosure of his hidden assets. That could take months. Trevor's panic reached new heights when Chris explained their cash flow problem. Vinny's people had given him 2 weeks to produce a substantial payment, and now his only source of funds was tied up in legal proceedings that could drag on indefinitely. We need to liquidate something, Trevor insisted. Jewelry, art, something valuable we can sell quickly. But when they attempted to access Chris's jewelry collection, they discovered that most of the valuable pieces were missing. The insurance company informed them that Patrick had moved the items to a secure facility before leaving for Oregon, citing security concerns while he was away. Technically legal, completely devastating to their immediate financial needs. Amy, meanwhile, was discovering that her trust fund, money set aside for her college education, was no longer accessible. Patrick had restructured the account before leaving for Oregon, changing the terms so that distributions required both parent signatures. With the divorce proceedings ongoing, any access to Amy's education money was effectively frozen. I can't pay for college now, Amy realized, the full scope of her father's revenge beginning to dawn on her. He's cutting me off completely. The psychological pressure was taking its toll on all 3 conspirators. Trevor was jumping at shadows, expecting Vinny's men to appear at any moment. Chris was discovering that 20 years of marriage to a financial genius meant that extracting money from him would be infinitely more complex than she'd anticipated. Amy was facing the possibility that her betrayal would cost her not just her relationship with her father, but her entire future. But Patrick's masterstroke was still to come. On Friday evening, Harrison Blackstone called with devastating news. Chris, we have a problem. Patrick's filing a countersuit. For what? Fraud, embezzlement, theft of intellectual property, and conspiracy to defraud. He's claiming that you and Trevor conspired to steal business information and that you've been transferring marital assets to hidden accounts. Chris felt her world tilt off its axis. That's not true. We looked at some documents, but Chris, they have evidence. Financial records, video surveillance, recorded conversations. They're not just seeking to deny you a settlement. They're claiming you owe him money for damages to his business. The trap was complete. Instead of walking away with millions from the divorce, Chris was facing the possibility of criminal charges and financial ruin. Trevor's desperation reached a breaking point as he realized that not only would there be no divorce settlement to pay his debts, but that his association with Chris had potentially made him an accessory to crimes he didn't even know he'd committed. Amy, listening to her mother's frantic phone conversation with the attorney, finally understood that her father hadn't just been angry about the affair. He'd been systematically documenting their betrayal and building a case that would destroy them all. In his hotel room, Patrick watched the chaos unfold through his surveillance network with cold satisfaction. His enemies had wanted to destroy his life and steal his fortune. Instead, they'd walked directly into a trap that would leave them facing criminal prosecution, financial ruin, and the very real possibility of violence from Trevor's criminal associates. The war was almost over, and Patrick Hardy had won before his enemies even realized they were fighting. Chapter 8. The Destruction. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning when Vincent Torino himself arrived at the Hardy mansion. Unlike his previous visits through intermediaries, this was personal. Trevor's 2-week extension had expired, and no payment had materialized. Worse, word had reached Vinny that Trevor's primary asset, his access to Patrick Hardy's money, was evaporating in a storm of legal complications. Chris answered the door to find a man who radiated controlled violence despite his expensive suit and polite demeanor. Behind him stood 2 associates who looked like they'd stepped out of a nightmare. "Mrs. Hardy," Vinny said with dangerous courtesy. "I'm Vincent Torino. I believe you know why I'm here." The mention of Vinny's name drained the color from Chris's face. Trevor had described these people in terms that left no doubt about their capacity for violence. Seeing them at her door, her formerly secure sanctuary, was a psychological shock that shattered her remaining composure. "Trevor isn't here," she said, her voice barely steady. "Oh, but I think he is," Vinny replied, stepping uninvited into the foyer. Trevor has a habit of hiding behind the women he seduces. It's become something of a pattern with him. Trevor appeared at the top of the stairs, his face ashen. The confident predator who destroyed the Hardy family was gone, replaced by a terrified man who understood that his time had run out. "Vinny," Trevor said, descending the stairs with forced calm. "I told your people I needed until the end of the month." "You've had 6 months, Trevor. End of the month, end of the week, end of the conversation, it doesn't matter. The time for extensions is over." Amy emerged from the kitchen, drawn by the voices, and froze when she saw the visitors. Even at 18, she possessed enough survival instinct to recognize predators when she encountered them. "Who are these people?" she whispered to her mother. "Business associates of Trevor's," Chris replied, though her voice betrayed her terror. Vinny smiled at the exchange, enjoying the family's growing fear. "Business associates. I like that. It's much more polite than the people Trevor stole money from." "I didn't steal anything," Trevor protested weakly. "The investment didn't work out as planned, but..." Vinny's backhand sent Trevor stumbling backward into the living room. The violence was swift, casual, and absolutely shocking to Chris and Amy, who'd never witnessed anything like it in their sheltered lives. "Don't lie to me in front of your girlfriend and her daughter," Vinny said calmly, straightening his jacket. "We both know you never intended to build any gyms. You took my money to fund your lifestyle and your pursuit of married women. The only question now is how you're going to pay it back." Trevor struggled to his feet, blood trickling from his split lip. "The divorce settlement." "What divorce settlement?" Vinny interrupted. "My sources tell me you're not getting any money from this divorce. In fact, they tell me you might be facing criminal charges for fraud. Is that true, Mrs. Hardy?" Chris found herself unable to speak, nodding mutely as the full scope of their situation became clear. They weren't just facing financial ruin. They were trapped between Patrick's legal revenge and Trevor's criminal obligations. "Interesting," Vinny continued. "So Trevor has convinced you to destroy your marriage for nothing, and now he can't pay his debts. That creates a problem for everyone involved." Amy, displaying more courage than anyone expected, stepped forward. "How much money are we talking about?" Vinny studied the teenager with newfound interest. "Almost $1 million, plus interest and penalties. Your boyfriend here has expensive tastes." "He's not my boyfriend," Amy said, disgust evident in her voice. "He's my mother's mistake." The comment drew a sharp look from Chris, but Amy was past caring about her mother's feelings. The romantic rebellion that had justified her betrayal of Patrick was revealed to be a sordid criminal enterprise, and she was beginning to understand the magnitude of what they'd lost. Smart girl, Vinny said approvingly. Unlike her mother, she can recognize a con man when she sees one. What do you want from us? Chris asked, finding her voice. I want my money. Since Trevor can't provide it, and you apparently can't provide it, we need to explore alternative arrangements. The threat was unmistakable. Vinny's people didn't just break legs. They took possession of valuable assets, including people, until debts were satisfied. There has to be something we can do, Trevor pleaded. Some arrangement. There is, Vinny replied. But you're not going to like it. At that moment, Patrick's voice cut through the tension from the foyer. Actually, there might be a solution that works for everyone. All eyes turned to see Patrick Hardy standing in the doorway of his own home, looking like a man who'd just returned from a pleasant vacation rather than someone whose family had been systematically destroyed. Vinny's expression shifted to one of professional interest. This was the man whose money Trevor had promised, the husband whose life had been destroyed by the affair. But instead of rage or desperation, Patrick radiated the calm confidence of someone who held all the cards. Mr. Hardy, Vinny said carefully, I wasn't expecting to see you here. It's my house, Patrick replied simply. And you're Vincent Torino. Your reputation precedes you. The acknowledgement of Vinny's identity sent a chill through the room. Patrick wasn't just aware of Trevor's criminal connections. He'd researched them thoroughly. I understand Trevor owes you a substantial sum, Patrick continued, walking into his own living room as if Vinny's armed associates weren't present. I also understand that recent developments have compromised his ability to pay. That's correct, Vinny replied, unsure where this conversation was heading. Patrick looked at his wife, his daughter, and the man who destroyed his family. His expression remained completely neutral, showing neither anger nor forgiveness, just cold calculation. I have a proposition, Patrick said finally, one that solves everyone's problems. Chris felt a surge of hope. Perhaps Patrick was offering to pay Trevor's debts to protect his family, choosing reconciliation over revenge. She was about to learn how completely she'd misunderstood the man she'd been married to for 20 years. I'm listening, Vinny said. Patrick smiled, the expression somehow more terrifying than Vinny's threats had been. Trevor Garrison owes you almost $1 million. My wife and her lover have been planning to steal that money from me through their divorce settlement. But what if I told you there was a way to collect your debt while ensuring that Trevor never bothers another family again? The room fell silent as everyone processed the implications of Patrick's words. He wasn't offering salvation. He was negotiating the terms of their destruction. Amy was the first to understand. Dad, no. Whatever you're thinking. Amy, Patrick said quietly, his voice carrying absolute authority. You lost the right to call me Dad when you chose to betray me for this man. You're not my daughter anymore. You're just another person who made the wrong choice. The words hit Amy like physical blows, but Patrick's attention had already shifted back to Vinny. I'm interested in your proposition, Vinny said carefully. Patrick's smile grew wider and colder. Excellent, because I think you're going to like what I have in mind. The final phase of Patrick Hardy's revenge was about to begin, and his enemies were going to discover that sometimes the most dangerous place to be is between a man and his justice. Chapter 9. No Forgiveness. After 2 weeks of caring for my father-in-law, I came home to find the door unlocked. Inside, my daughter lay covered in blood. Barely breathing, she screamed, "Run now." Why? I asked when footsteps approached from behind. I turned around and saw. Patrick paused, looking directly at Vincent Torino, exactly what I expected to see. The confusion on everyone's faces was palpable. Patrick's words seemed disconnected from reality. Amy wasn't covered in blood. She wasn't barely breathing, and the scene he described bore no resemblance to the current situation. I'm sorry, Vinny said carefully, but I think there's been some misunderstanding. Patrick's smile was arctic. No misunderstanding, Mr. Torino. I'm simply describing what this scene will look like when the police arrive in approximately 15 minutes. The words hit the room like a physical force. Trevor went pale, Chris stumbled backward, and Amy's eyes widened in terror as she began to understand the scope of her father's final gambit. "You see," Patrick continued conversationally, "when I learned about my family's betrayal, I had to decide between forgiveness and justice. My wife chose to destroy our marriage for a con man. My daughter chose to spy on me for my enemies. And Trevor chose to steal from dangerous people and hide behind my family when his crimes caught up with him." Vinny's associates shifted nervously, hands moving toward concealed weapons, but Vinny held up a restraining hand. This conversation had taken an unexpected turn, and he wanted to understand where it was heading. "Chris," Patrick said, addressing his wife directly for the first time, "you wanted excitement, passion, a life free from the boring constraints of marriage to a workaholic. How does it feel now that you're about to get exactly what you wish for?" "Patrick, please," Chris whispered, genuine terror replacing her earlier defiance. "We can fix this. We can work it out." "Fix it?" Patrick's laugh was devoid of humor. "You systematically destroyed 20 years of marriage, stole business secrets, corrupted our daughter, and conspired with a criminal to rob me blind. What exactly do you think we're going to fix?" Amy found her voice, desperation making her brave. "Dad, I'm sorry. I know I made mistakes, but I'm still your daughter. You can't just—" "I can't what?" Patrick interrupted. "I can't treat you like the enemy you chose to become. I can't hold you accountable for betraying the man who loved you more than his own life." Patrick turned to face Amy fully, and she saw something in his eyes that made her step backward. This wasn't anger or disappointment. It was the complete absence of love, as if she'd become a stranger to him. "Amy, you recorded my private conversations and shared them with the man who was destroying our family. You helped plan my financial ruin while I was caring for your dying grandfather. You celebrated my betrayal and called it justice. Did you really think there would be no consequences?" Trevor, sensing the conversation spiraling towards something catastrophic, tried to assert himself. "Patrick, let's all calm down and—" "Trevor," Patrick said without looking at him, "in about 10 minutes, you're going to be dead." The matter-of-fact statement froze everyone in place. Patrick wasn't threatening Trevor. He was stating a simple fact, as if discussing the weather. Vinny found his voice. "Mr. Hardy, I think we should clarify what's happening here." Patrick finally looked at Vinny directly. "What's happening, Mr. Torino, is that you're about to collect your debt in full, and I'm about to solve all my problems simultaneously." Patrick pulled out his phone and began playing an audio recording. Trevor's voice filled the room, discussing his plan to seduce Chris, steal Patrick's money, and disappear with his new fortune. But the recording had been edited, spliced together from multiple conversations to create a narrative where Trevor explicitly threatened to kill Patrick if the divorce settlement didn't come through. "That's not what I said," Trevor protested frantically. "That's been edited." "Has it?" Patrick asked mildly. "I'm sure the police will be very thorough in their investigation. Of course, by the time they sort out the truth, you'll already be dead, so it won't matter much to you." The pieces of Patrick's plan were coming together with terrifying clarity. He'd manipulated everyone, Vinny, Chris, Amy, even Trevor, into positions where his final revenge would appear to be simple criminal justice. "You called them," Vinny said, understanding dawning. "You called the police." "I called them 20 minutes ago," Patrick confirmed. "I reported that my wife's criminal lover had threatened my family and was holding us hostage. I mentioned that he was connected to organized crime figures from Las Vegas who were also at my home, armed and dangerous." Vinny's professional calm cracked for the first time. "You son of a bitch. You're setting us up." "I'm not setting anyone up," Patrick replied. "I'm simply allowing the natural consequences of everyone's choices to play out. Trevor chose to steal from you and hide behind my family. You chose to come to my home with armed men to collect your debt. Chris chose to betray our marriage. Amy chose to betray our family. I'm just facilitating the resolution." Amy was hyperventilating now, understanding that her father intended for all of them to suffer the consequences of their choices while he emerged as the innocent victim. "The blood," she gasped. "You said I'd be covered in blood." Patrick's expression didn't change. Mr. Torino's associates are armed and dangerous. When the police arrive to find a hostage situation, there will unfortunately be violence. Crossfire is unpredictable, Amy. Innocent people sometimes get hurt. You're insane, Chris whispered. You're willing to see your own daughter killed for revenge? My daughter died when she chose Trevor over me, Patrick replied. The girl standing here is just someone who looks like her. The sound of sirens in the distance galvanized everyone into action. Vinny's men drew their weapons. Trevor began frantically searching for an escape route, and Chris grabbed Amy's arm, pulling her toward the back of the house. There's nowhere to run, Patrick said calmly. I've made sure of that. Indeed, Patrick's planning had been meticulous. He'd disabled the mansion's back exits, blocked the garage door, and even cut the phone lines to prevent anyone from contradicting his story to the police. His enemies were trapped in a scenario where any outcome would destroy them. Vinny, realizing the scope of the trap, made the only logical choice available to him. This is over, he told his men. We're leaving. Now. But Patrick shook his head. Mr. Torino, I'm afraid that's not possible. You see, I've already told the police that you're holding my family hostage. If you leave now, you'll be fugitives from a federal kidnapping charge. If you stay, well, Patrick shrugged eloquently. The sirens were getting closer, and everyone in the room understood that the police would arrive to find exactly what Patrick had described, a domestic situation involving organized crime figures, a missing $1 million, and a family in crisis. Trevor made one last desperate play. Patrick, if you let me go, I'll disappear forever. You'll never see me again. Patrick looked at the man who destroyed his family with such complete contempt that Trevor actually stepped backward. Trevor, there's nowhere on earth you could go that would be far enough away from me. I have resources you can't imagine and patience you can't fathom. Your death today is actually mercy compared to what I was planning for you. Amy broke free from her mother and threw herself at Patrick's feet, sobbing hysterically. Please, Daddy, please. I'm sorry. I'll do anything. I'll testify against them, Patrick looked down at his daughter, his former daughter, with eyes as cold as winter stone. Amy, you made your choice when you had the chance to be loyal. You chose Trevor. Now live with the consequences. The first police car pulled into the driveway as Patrick calmly walked to his front door. In 60 seconds, he would transform from the architect of destruction into the traumatized victim of a home invasion. His enemies would be left to explain their presence in his home, their criminal connections, and their conspiracy against him to law enforcement officers who'd already been briefed on Patrick's version of events. Chris, Trevor, Amy, and Vinny all understood simultaneously that Patrick Hardy had orchestrated the perfect revenge. He would emerge from this situation as the grieving husband, betrayed father, and innocent victim. They would face criminal charges, violent retribution, and very possibly death. As Patrick opened the door to greet the arriving officers, he felt a cold satisfaction that had nothing to do with justice and everything to do with the complete destruction of those who betrayed him. The foundation of his old life was gone, but he'd built something new on its ruins, something harder, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. Behind him, his former family faced the consequences of their choices, and Patrick Hardy felt absolutely no remorse for what he'd unleashed. In his mind, they declared war on him, and he'd simply ensured that he was the only survivor. The man who'd once believed in forgiveness and second chances was gone forever, replaced by someone who understood that some betrayals deserved only one response: complete and total destruction. 3 hours later, Trevor Garrison was dead from multiple gunshot wounds sustained during what police described as a confrontation between organized crime figures and domestic terrorism suspects. Chris and Amy were in federal custody, facing charges ranging from conspiracy to domestic terrorism. Vinny Torino and his associates were fugitives wanted in connection with a kidnapping and murder. Patrick Hardy sat in his hotel room, watching the news coverage of the tragedy that had destroyed his family. The reporters described him as a victim, a man whose life had been torn apart by his wife's criminal associates and his daughter's poor judgment. He felt nothing. No grief, no guilt, no regret. Just the cold satisfaction of a man who'd faced betrayal and responded with perfect, ruthless justice. The Hardy family was finished, but Patrick Hardy had survived. And in his mind, that was exactly how it should be. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Morning Routine. The alarm pierced through the silence at 6:30 a.m., just as it had every weekday for the past 8 years. Gabriel Torres rolled out of bed with military precision, his movements sharp and deliberate despite the early hour. At 35, he maintained the same discipline that had served him well during his 12 years as a Marine Corps sniper, and later as a private security consultant for high-profile clients. "Daddy, is Mommy ready?" 5-year-old Oliver bounded into the kitchen, his Batman pajamas wrinkled from sleep. The boy's dark hair stuck up at odd angles, a genetic gift from Gabriel's own stubborn locks. "She's getting dressed, buddy. Go brush your teeth while I make breakfast." Gabriel ruffled his son's hair, watching as Oliver scrambled toward the bathroom. The morning routine was sacred in the Torres household. Breakfast at 7, out the door by 7:30. Isabella at the train station by 8 for her commute to the city. Isabella emerged from their bedroom looking immaculate as always. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a sleek bun, her charcoal business suit pressed to perfection. At 32, she'd built an impressive career as a marketing director for a luxury hotel chain, often working late and traveling for conferences. Gabriel admired her ambition, even when it meant fewer family dinners. "Coffee's ready," Gabriel said, handing her the travel mug she preferred. Black, 2 sugars, just how she'd taken it since their college days at Northwestern. "Thanks, babe." Isabella kissed his cheek absently, already scrolling through her phone. "I might be late tonight. Big presentation tomorrow for the Henderson Group." Gabriel nodded, accustomed to her demanding schedule. He'd built his consulting business around flexibility, taking contracts that allowed him to be present for Oliver while Isabella climbed the corporate ladder. It was an arrangement that worked, or so he'd believed. The drive to Union Station took 25 minutes through Chicago's morning traffic. Oliver chattered about his upcoming school project on dinosaurs, while Isabella responded to emails in the passenger seat. Gabriel watched her in the rearview mirror, noting how she'd started wearing more makeup lately, how her work clothes had become more fashionable. "Bye, Mommy," Oliver called as Isabella climbed out at the departure zone. "Be good for Daddy," she said, blowing them both a kiss before disappearing into the crowd of commuters. The return trip was usually filled with Oliver's endless questions about everything from why the sky was blue to whether dinosaurs could swim. But today, something felt different. Gabriel caught his son staring out the window with unusual intensity, his small hands pressed against the glass. "What's on your mind, soldier?" Gabriel asked, using the nickname he'd given Oliver since the boy learned to walk. "Daddy," Oliver's voice was barely above a whisper. "When we go home, we need to be careful." Gabriel's training kicked in, the same instinct that had kept him alive through 3 tours in Afghanistan. His son's tone carried a weight that no 5-year-old should possess. "What do you mean, Oliver?" "It's about Mom." The boy's voice cracked slightly. "She does things when you're not there." Gabriel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "What kind of things?" Oliver turned to face his father, his young eyes holding a seriousness that chilled Gabriel to the bone. "Promise you won't get mad at me." "I promise, buddy. Tell me what you've seen." "The mailman comes inside when you're not home. He stays for a long time. Mommy told me it's a secret game and I can't tell you." Oliver's words tumbled out in a rush. "But yesterday, I saw them in your bedroom through the crack in the door. They were wrestling without clothes on, and Mommy was making the same sound she makes when you wrestle with her at night." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Gabriel pulled into a parking lot, his hands shaking slightly as he processed his son's innocent revelation. The mailman. Of course. Regular delivery schedule, familiar face, Perfect cover. Oliver, look at me. Gabriel turned in his seat, meeting his son's frightened gaze. You did the right thing telling me. This isn't your fault, and I'm not mad at you. But from now on, when we see something that doesn't feel right, we keep it between us, okay? The boy nodded solemnly. Are you going to stop them from wrestling? Gabriel's jaw clenched. Yes, son. I'm going to stop them. Chapter 2. The Watching Game. They didn't go straight home. Instead, Gabriel drove to a nearby park where Oliver could play while his father's mind raced through possibilities and plans. 20 years of tactical training doesn't simply disappear because you've been betrayed by the person you trusted most. How long has the mailman been coming inside? Gabriel asked as Oliver climbed the jungle gym. Since before my birthday, Oliver replied, hanging upside down from the monkey bars. Maybe before Christmas too. 6 months. Maybe longer. Gabriel felt the familiar cold settle over him. The same detachment that had made him one of the military's most effective snipers. Emotion was a luxury he couldn't afford when calculating angles and wind speed, and it was a luxury he couldn't afford now. His phone buzzed with a text from Isabella. Forgot to mention, working late again tonight. Don't wait up. Love you. Gabriel stared at the message, analyzing it with new eyes. The timing was too convenient, the excuse too familiar. He wondered how many late nights had actually been spent with their mailman in his own bed. Daddy, can we go home now? Oliver asked, jogging back to the truck. Actually, I have a better idea. Want to play a game? Oliver's eyes lit up. What kind of game? It's called the Watching Game. We're going to park where we can see our house, but nobody can see us. Then we watch and see what happens. Gabriel drove to a position 3 blocks away, parking the truck behind a row of delivery vans that provided perfect concealment while maintaining a clear line of sight to their 2-story colonial home. He'd learned patience in the desert, spending hours motionless while waiting for the perfect shot. This was no different. They didn't have to wait long. At 10:47 a.m., a familiar blue postal truck turned onto their street. Gabriel recognized the driver immediately. Trevor Walsh, mid-20s, athletic build, the kind of cocky smile that women seem to find charming. Gabriel had always been polite to the man, even tipped him at Christmas. There's Mommy's friend, Oliver said quietly. Gabriel watched through binoculars as Trevor parked in their driveway, rather than on the street like a normal mail delivery. The man looked around cautiously before using what was clearly a house key to enter through the front door. 37 minutes. Gabriel murmured when Trevor finally emerged, his uniform slightly disheveled. The mailman locked the door behind him and drove away, whistling. Is the game over now, Daddy? Not yet, buddy. We're going to play this game a few more times. Over the next week, Gabriel documented everything. Trevor arrived every Tuesday and Thursday at approximately 10:45 a.m., always staying between 30 and 45 minutes. He had a key, suggesting this arrangement had been going on for some time. Gabriel photographed the license plate, the exact times, even managed to capture images of Trevor's face as he left their house. But Gabriel wanted more than evidence of an affair. He wanted to understand the full scope of the betrayal. Thursday morning, after dropping Isabella at the station, Gabriel called his old military contact, Rico Valdez, who now ran a private investigation firm in Denver. I need a complete background check, Gabriel said without preamble. Trevor Walsh, Chicago postal worker, DOB probably 1998 or 1999. Personal or professional? Very personal. Rico didn't ask questions. Within hours, Gabriel had Trevor's full history. 3 previous affairs with married women on his route, a gambling problem, 2 DUIs, and a restraining order from an ex-girlfriend who'd accused him of stalking. Gabriel felt the familiar calm settle over him as he studied the information. Trevor Walsh wasn't just sleeping with his wife. He was a predator who specialized in targeting married women while their husbands were away. Oliver, Gabriel said that evening as they ate dinner, remember when we talked about keeping secret between us? The boy nodded, twirling spaghetti on his fork. Tomorrow, we're going to play the watching game one more time. But this time, Daddy needs to go inside the house while you wait in the truck. Can you be brave for me? Are you going to stop Mommy's friend from coming over? Gabriel met his son's eyes. Yes, Oliver. I'm going to stop him. Forever. Chapter 3. The first move. Friday morning brought unseasonably warm weather for October in Chicago. Gabriel had planned for this day with military precision, down to the last detail. As they drove Isabella to the station, she seemed more nervous than usual, checking her phone constantly. "Everything all right?" Gabriel asked. "Just work stress," she replied, but her hand was shaking slightly. "I'll probably be late again tonight." "Of course you will," Gabriel thought, but smiled instead. "Don't work too hard." At exactly 10:30 a.m., Gabriel parked the truck 2 blocks away with Oliver inside, the doors locked and the air conditioning running. "Remember what we practiced?" Gabriel told his son. "If anyone comes near the truck who isn't me, you hit this button." He showed Oliver the panic alarm on his keychain. "Then you call Uncle Rico." Gabriel had programmed Rico's number into a prepaid phone for emergencies. "I remember, Daddy. Be careful." Gabriel made his way through the backyards, using the same stealth techniques that had kept him alive overseas. He entered through the basement window he'd deliberately left unlatched, moving silently through his own home like a ghost. At 10:47 a.m., right on schedule, he heard the front door open. "Isabella." Trevor's voice called out. "I brought lunch." Gabriel crept up the basement stairs, staying in the shadows. Through the kitchen doorway, he could see Trevor setting out Chinese takeout containers on the dining room table, the same table where Gabriel ate breakfast with his son every morning. When Trevor headed upstairs, probably to wait in the master bedroom, Gabriel followed. "Surprise," Gabriel said quietly as he stepped into his own bedroom doorway. Trevor spun around, his face cycling through confusion, fear, and panic in rapid succession. He was already half undressed, his postal shirt hanging open. "Gabriel, I was delivering," Trevor stammered. "A package to my bedroom? While using the key my wife gave you." Gabriel's voice was conversational, almost friendly. "Sit down, Trevor." "Look, man, I can explain." I said sit down. Something in Gabriel's tone made Trevor comply immediately. He perched on the edge of the bed where Gabriel slept every night, where his son sometimes crawled in during thunderstorms. Gabriel pulled out his phone and showed Trevor the photographs. Thursday, October 3rd, 10:47 a.m. to 11:23 a.m. Tuesday, October 8th, 10:45 a.m. to 11:31 a.m. "Should I continue?" Trevor's face went pale. "It's not what you think." "Really?" "Because I think you've been fucking my wife in my bed while my 5-year-old son was in the house. I think you've been doing it for months. And I think you've done this before. Sarah Martinez on Elm Street, Jennifer Park on Oak Avenue, Linda Chun on Maple Drive." Gabriel recited the names from Rico's report, watching Trevor's eyes widen with each one. "How did you?" "I know a lot of things, Trevor. I know about your gambling debts. I know about the restraining order. I know you specifically requested this route because it gave you access to lonely housewives." Gabriel sat down across from Trevor, his posture relaxed but his eyes deadly. "What I want to know is why you thought you could do this to my family." Trevor tried to stand, but Gabriel's hand shot out, gripping the man's wrist with enough force to make him gasp. "We're not done talking," Gabriel said calmly. "You see, Trevor, I spent 12 years in the Marines. I learned a lot about patience, about planning, about making sure my targets never saw me coming. And right now, you're my target. You can't hurt me," Trevor wheezed. "People will know." "Who will know?" "Your supervisor thinks you're on your route. My wife thinks you're just a friendly mailman. My son thinks you're playing a wrestling game with his mother." Gabriel's grip tightened. "The truth is, no one would miss you for hours. Maybe days." Trevor's breathing became rapid and shallow. "What do you want?" Gabriel smiled, and for the first time, Trevor seemed to understand the depth of his mistake. "I want you to disappear, Trevor. I want you to request a transfer to another city, another state. I want you to never contact my wife again, never drive down this street again, never even think about my family again. And if I don't," Gabriel released Trevor's wrist and stood up. "If you don't, I'll destroy you piece by piece. Your job, your credit, your reputation. I'll make sure every married woman in Chicago knows exactly what kind of predator you are. And if that doesn't work," Gabriel paused at the bedroom door. "Well, let's just say I know how to make problems disappear permanently." Trevor sat frozen on the bed as Gabriel walked downstairs and out the front door, locking it behind him with his own key. By the time he returned to the truck, Gabriel was smiling genuinely for the first time in days. "Did you stop Mommy's friend?" Oliver asked. "Phase 1 is complete, soldier. Now we move to Phase 2. Chapter 4. The Web Titans. Trevor Walsh submitted his transfer request that same afternoon. Within a week, he was assigned to a route in Portland, Oregon, nearly 2,000 miles away. Gabriel monitored the man's social media and credit reports through Rico's contacts, ensuring Trevor understood that distance wouldn't protect him if he ever returned. But Trevor was just the beginning. Isabella was the real target, and Gabriel intended to make her betrayal cost her everything she held dear. "Daddy, why doesn't the mailman come anymore?" Oliver asked the following Thursday as they returned from the station. "He got a new job far away," Gabriel replied. "But don't worry about him. We have other games to play." Gabriel had spent years studying Isabella's patterns, her ambitions, her weaknesses. She valued her career above all else, worked obsessively to maintain her image as the perfect corporate wife, and had built her entire identity around her professional success. That's where Gabriel would strike. Using skills learned during corporate security consultations, Gabriel began documenting every aspect of Isabella's work life. He knew her passwords. She'd never been careful about cybersecurity, often using variations of Oliver's name and birthday. Her laptop, left carelessly open while she showered, revealed far more than just scheduling conflicts. Isabella had been embellishing her expense reports for months, claiming personal meals and purchases as business expenses. Nothing major, just enough to supplement her shopping habits and spa treatments. She'd also been taking credit for marketing campaigns developed by junior staff members, using their ideas to secure her recent promotion. But Gabriel found something even more interesting in her deleted emails. Correspondence with a headhunter about a position with a competing hotel chain in Los Angeles. Isabella was planning to leave Chicago, to take Oliver and start fresh on the West Coast. She'd been interviewing secretly for weeks. "She thinks she's going to run away," Gabriel murmured as he copied the files to an encrypted drive. "She has no idea what's coming." Gabriel's next call was to Marcus Rodriguez, a former Marine who now worked in corporate intelligence. Marcus specialized in what he called reputation management, helping clients navigate scandals, or in some cases, creating scandals for their enemies. "I need you to audit someone," Gabriel said. "Isabella Torres, marketing director at Premier Luxury Hotels. I want everything: expenses, performance reviews, client feedback. And I want it to look like it came from an internal whistleblower. Personal or professional? Both. She's been stealing from the company and planning to jump ship to a competitor. I just need someone to connect the dots." Marcus had never asked questions during their military service, and he didn't start now. Timeline: 2 weeks. I want her gone before she has a chance to execute her exit strategy. While Marcus worked his magic in the corporate world, Gabriel began Phase 3 of his plan. He hired a different private investigator, Maria Santos, to follow Isabella during her supposed late nights. Maria was a former Chicago police detective who specialized in divorce cases, and she had a reputation for obtaining evidence that would hold up in court. The photographs Maria provided were devastating. Isabella wasn't just having an affair with Trevor. She'd been seeing multiple men over the past year. The hotel bar she claimed to visit for networking events was actually a high-end pickup spot where she met wealthy guests. Maria documented at least 4 different encounters, complete with hotel room receipts and credit card statements. "Your wife has expensive tastes," Maria reported during their meeting at a coffee shop downtown. "She's been living a double life for at least a year, maybe longer. Designer clothes, spa treatments, luxury dinners, all paid for by her dates." Gabriel studied the photographs without emotion. Isabella laughing with a man old enough to be her father. Isabella kissing a younger man in the elevator of the Ritz-Carlton. Isabella entering hotel rooms with strangers while her husband believed she was building her career. "How long would you estimate this has been going on?" Gabriel asked. "Based on the pattern of credit card charges and hotel loyalty program data, at least 18 months. Probably started around the time she got her promotion." Gabriel nodded, filing the information away. Isabella's betrayal wasn't just about Trevor. It was a systematic pattern of infidelity and deception that had begun long before the mailman entered their lives. "I need one more thing," Gabriel told Maria. "I need you to document her meeting with the headhunter. She's planning to leave the state with my son, and I need proof of her intentions." Maria smiled grimly. "Consider it done." Chapter 5. The Trap Springs. The first domino fell on a Wednesday morning. Isabella's phone rang as they were driving to the station, and Gabriel could hear the panic in her voice as she answered. "What do you mean, there's an investigation?" Isabella's face went white. "I haven't done anything wrong." Gabriel kept his expression neutral as Isabella ended the call, her hands shaking. "Problem at work?" he asked innocently. "Just some administrative nonsense. Nothing I can't handle." But Isabella's voice betrayed her fear. By the time Gabriel returned home after dropping Oliver at school, Isabella had called in sick and was frantically searching through her home office, shredding documents, and deleting files from her personal laptop. Too late, Gabriel thought as he watched through the window. Marcus had already provided copies of everything to Premier Luxury Hotel's internal audit team, along with an anonymous tip about Isabella's planned defection to their competitor. Gabriel's phone rang that afternoon. Rico's voice was tense. "Your wife just hired a divorce attorney. Big gun from downtown, specializes in custody cases. Name? Patricia Kellerman. She's been calling around, trying to get dirt on you. Military records, financial history, anything she can use to paint you as unstable." Gabriel almost laughed. Isabella was still thinking like an amateur, trying to play defense when she should have been running. "What do they find?" "Clean slate. Your records are sealed under national security provisions, and your financials show steady income from legitimate consulting work." "She's got nothing." "Good. Keep monitoring her communications. I want to know every move she makes." That evening, Isabella paced the kitchen while Gabriel cooked dinner, her professional composure completely shattered. "Gabe, I need to ask you something," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "If something happened to my job, would you support me while I look for something new?" Gabriel looked up from the stove, feigning concern. "Of course. What's wrong?" "There's been some kind of internal audit. Probably just routine, but you know how corporate politics can be." Isabella sat down at the kitchen table, wrapping her hands around a coffee mug. "I might need to take some time off while things get sorted out." "We'll figure it out," Gabriel assured her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Family sticks together, right?" Isabella nodded, tears threatening to spill over. "Right. Family first." Gabriel squeezed her shoulder gently, thinking about the photographs in his safe, the recorded phone calls, the evidence of her planned escape with Oliver. Always. The second domino fell 3 days later. Isabella was terminated from her position at Premier Luxury Hotels, effective immediately. Security escorted her from the building with a box of personal items, her corporate credit cards confiscated, her access to company systems permanently revoked. Gabriel received the news from Marcus 30 minutes before Isabella's humiliated call. "They're saying I falsified expense reports," Isabella sobbed over the phone. "They're threatening to press charges unless I pay back what they claim I owe." "How much?" Gabriel asked, already knowing the answer. $47,000, plus penalties. "Gabe, I don't have that kind of money." "We'll figure something out," Gabriel said calmly. "Come home. We'll talk about it." But Isabella didn't come home. According to Maria's surveillance, she went straight to her attorney's office, then to a bank, then to a hotel bar, where she proceeded to drink herself into near unconsciousness. Gabriel picked up Oliver from school and took him for ice cream, letting his son chatter about his day while Gabriel planned the final phase of his operation. "Daddy, will Mommy be okay?" Oliver asked as they walked back to the truck. "She seemed sad this morning. Mommy made some bad choices, soldier." Sometimes when people make bad choices, they have to face consequences. Gabriel buckled Oliver into his car seat. "But no matter what happens, you and I will always be okay." Oliver nodded solemnly. "Because we're a team?" "Because we're a team," Gabriel confirmed. "And teammates never betray each other." That night, Isabella stumbled through the front door at nearly midnight, reeking of alcohol and desperation. Gabriel was waiting in the living room. Divorce papers spread across the coffee table. "We need to talk," he said quietly. Chapter 6, The Reckoning. Isabella stood swaying in the doorway, her designer dress wrinkled, her makeup smeared from crying. For a moment, Gabriel almost felt sorry for her, almost. Then he remembered Oliver's innocent voice describing the wrestling games, and the feeling evaporated. "You're drunk," Gabriel observed. "I'm ruined," Isabella slurred, collapsing onto the couch. 20 years of building my career, and it's gone. All of it. Gabriel gestured to the papers on the coffee table. "I know about Trevor. I know about the others. I know about Los Angeles." Isabella's head snapped up, her eyes trying to focus. "What are you talking about?" "The mailman who had a key to our house. The businessman from the Ritz-Carlton. The venture capitalist from the Palmer House." Should I continue? Gabriel's voice remained calm, clinical. "Or would you prefer to discuss your interview with Crawford Hotels in L.A.? The color drained from Isabella's face. "How did you—" "I know everything, Isabella. Every lie, every betrayal, every time you looked me in the eye and lied about working late." Gabriel leaned forward. "I know you were planning to take Oliver and disappear to California. I know you've been stealing from your company to fund your affairs. I know you hired Patricia Kellerman to try to destroy me in court." Isabella began to sob, the sound harsh and broken in the quiet house. "I never meant for it to go this far." "When did it start?" Gabriel asked. "The affairs, the lying, the stealing. When did my wife become someone I don't recognize?" "After Oliver was born," Isabella whispered. "I felt trapped, like my life was over. You were so good at being a father, so natural, and I felt like I was suffocating. The first time was it just happened. A conference in New York, too much wine, a charming stranger." Gabriel nodded, filing the information away. "And Trevor. He was so young, so eager. He made me feel beautiful again, desired." Isabella wiped her nose with the back of her hand. "I know it was wrong, but I couldn't stop. I didn't want to stop." "What about Oliver? What about him?" "He saw you, Isabella. My 5-year-old son walked in on you and Trevor. He's been carrying that secret for months, thinking he was protecting some kind of game." Gabriel's voice finally showed emotion, cold, hard anger. "You traumatized our child to satisfy your selfish needs." Isabella's sobs intensified. "I never meant for him to see anything. I thought he was at school. He was homesick, fever of 102, and you sent him to his room so you could fuck the mailman in our bed." Gabriel stood up, towering over her. "You put your affair above our son's well-being." "I can fix this," Isabella said desperately. "I'll get help, therapy, whatever you want. We can work through this." Gabriel laughed, the sound devoid of humor. "Work through this? You've been lying to me for over a year. You've been stealing money, planning to kidnap my son, and destroying our family. There is no working through this." He picked up the divorce papers and placed them in Isabella's lap. "You're going to sign these. Tonight, you'll agree to joint custody with primary residence going to me. You'll liquidate your retirement account to pay back what you stole from Premier Hotels. And you'll never contest any of my decisions regarding Oliver's welfare. And if I don't," Gabriel pulled out his phone and showed her the photographs. Isabella stared at images of herself with various men, her face cycling through shock, horror, and resignation. "If you don't, these go to your parents, your sister, your friends from college, and every contact in your professional network. I'll also make sure the DA's office receives evidence of your embezzlement, complete with documentation of how you use company funds to finance your affairs." Isabella stared at the photos, her hands shaking. "You've been planning this for weeks." "Months," Gabriel corrected. "Ever since Oliver told me about the mailman. I've been very thorough, Isabella. I have recordings of your phone calls, copies of your bank statements, hotel receipts, everything. You have no cards left to play." "What about Oliver?" "He needs his mother. Oliver needs stability, honesty, and parents who put his welfare first. You've proven you're incapable of any of those things." Gabriel sat back down, his posture relaxed but his eyes hard. "You can be part of his life on weekends and holidays, under my supervision, if you agree to my terms. Or you can fight me and lose everything, including any chance of a relationship with your son." Isabella picked up the divorce papers with trembling hands. You're destroying our family. No, Isabella. You destroyed our family the first time you brought another man into our home. I'm just cleaning up the mess. She signed the papers with tears streaming down her face, her signature barely legible. When she finished, Gabriel took the documents and placed them in his briefcase. You have until tomorrow morning to pack whatever personal items you want to keep. After that, you're not welcome in this house. Gabriel stood up and walked toward the stairs. Oh, and Isabella, if you ever try to take Oliver away from me, if you ever put him in danger again, I will hunt you down and make you disappear. That's not a threat, it's a promise. Isabella remained on the couch, sobbing into her hands, as Gabriel went upstairs to check on his sleeping son. Chapter 7. New Beginnings. 3 months later, Gabriel stood in the kitchen making breakfast while Oliver practiced reading at the table. The morning routine had evolved. No more trips to the train station. No more walking on eggshells around Isabella's moods. Just father and son, building a life based on honesty and mutual respect. Daddy, will Mommy come to my birthday party? Oliver asked, sounding up from his book. If she wants to, Gabriel replied, though he doubted Isabella would show. She'd missed 2 scheduled visitations already, sending apologetic texts about needing time to get her life together. Isabella had moved to Milwaukee, taking a job with a small marketing firm that was willing to overlook her professional scandal. She lived in a studio apartment and drove a 10-year-old Honda, a far cry from the luxury lifestyle she'd maintained during her affair phase. Gabriel received court-mandated reports on her progress. She was attending therapy, working to pay back the money she'd stolen, and had apparently ended all romantic relationships. Dr. Martinez says it's normal for kids to have mixed feelings about divorce, Oliver announced, returning to his book. Gabriel smiled. The child psychologist had been Oliver's idea. The boy had asked why he felt sad about Mommy leaving when he was also happy that the wrestling games were over. Dr. Martinez was helping Oliver process the complex emotions that came with watching his family dissolve. What did you tell her yesterday? Gabriel asked. That I'm glad you and Mommy don't fight anymore, but I miss having 2 parents who live in the same house. Oliver looked up with serious eyes. Is that okay? It's very okay, soldier. You're allowed to have complicated feelings about complicated situations. Gabriel's phone buzzed with a text from Rico. Package delivered. All clean. Gabriel deleted the message, satisfied. Rico had just confirmed that Trevor Walsh's new life in Portland had been thoroughly disrupted. The predatory mailman had been arrested for stalking a married woman on his new route. Apparently, some habits were hard to break. The arrest, combined with Gabriel's anonymous tips to the Postal Service about Trevor's pattern of affairs, had resulted in termination and a federal investigation into mail fraud. Trevor would never threaten another family. Gabriel's consulting business had expanded significantly since the divorce. Word had spread through private security circles about his expertise in personal protection services, and he'd been hired by 3 other betrayed spouses to investigate and document their partners' infidelities. Gabriel found the work satisfying, helping people uncover the truth and protect their children from narcissistic, destructive parents. Daddy, someone's at the door. Oliver called from the living room. Gabriel checked the security monitor and frowned. Isabella stood on the front porch, looking nervous and carrying a wrapped present. It's Mommy, Gabriel told Oliver, who immediately brightened. Isabella had lost weight, her once perfect appearance replaced by a more natural, subdued look. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail instead of her trademark business-appropriate bun. Hi, she said quietly when Gabriel opened the door. You're 3 hours early, Gabriel observed. And we haven't confirmed this visit. I know. I was hoping we could talk before I spend time with Oliver. Isabella's voice was different, smaller, less confident. I have something I need to say. Gabriel studied her for a long moment, then stepped aside. Oliver, Mommy's here for a visit. Why don't you show her your dinosaur project? As Oliver dragged his mother toward his display of plastic dinosaurs, Gabriel remained vigilant. Trust, once broken, couldn't be rebuilt with simple apologies and changed behavior. Isabella would have to prove herself over time, if she ever could. This is amazing, honey, Isabella told Oliver, examining his carefully arranged dinosaur habitat. Tell me about this one. That's a velociraptor. They hunted in packs and were super smart. Daddy says they're like military teams because they work together. Oliver launched into an enthusiastic explanation, and for a moment, Gabriel could see the shadow of the family they might have been. After an hour of playing with Oliver, Isabella approached Gabriel in the kitchen. I've been thinking about what you said that night, she began. About Oliver needing parents who put his welfare first. I realize I never did that. I put my needs, my wants, my selfish desires above everything else. Gabriel continued washing dishes, letting her talk. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect us to get back together. But I want you to know that I'm trying to become someone worthy of being Oliver's mother. Isabella's voice was steady, sincere. I'm in therapy twice a week. I paid back everything I stole. I haven't been with anyone since we signed the papers. Good for you, Gabriel said neutrally. I know it doesn't fix anything. I know I destroyed something beautiful and precious, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. Isabella wiped her eyes. But Oliver is innocent in all this. He deserves better than what I gave him. Gabriel turned to face her. He deserves a mother who chooses him over her own convenience. Every time, without question. I know, and I'm trying to learn how to be that person. Gabriel nodded slowly. Then keep trying. Prove it with actions, not words. Show up when you say you will. Put his needs first. Be honest about your limitations. He paused. And never, ever bring another man around him unless you're prepared to make that a permanent relationship. Understand. I hope you do, because there won't be another chance after this. Disappoint him again, and you'll lose him forever. Isabella nodded, tears flowing freely. I won't let him down. Gabriel watched as she returned to Oliver, sitting on the floor to examine his latest Lego creation. Time would tell if Isabella could truly change, or if this was just another performance designed to manipulate the situation to her advantage. Either way, Gabriel would be watching. Chapter 8, The Final Test. 1 year after the divorce was finalized, Gabriel received an unexpected call from Patricia Kellerman, Isabella's former attorney. Mr. Torres, I have an unusual situation I'd like to discuss with you, the lawyer said. It concerns your ex-wife. Gabriel was immediately suspicious. I thought you no longer represented Isabella. I don't, but I have information you need to know, and frankly, I'm not sure who else to call. Patricia's voice carried an urgency that made Gabriel pay attention. Can we meet? Preferably somewhere private. They met at a coffee shop in suburban Naperville, far from Gabriel's usual haunts. Patricia looked tired, older than her 40-something years. Isabella came to see me last week. Patricia began without preamble. She wanted to know if there was any way to modify the custody agreement to give her primary residence of Oliver. Gabriel's blood turned cold. On what grounds? That's just it. She didn't have grounds. When I explained that she needed to demonstrate a significant change in circumstances, she asked about your military background. Specifically, she wanted to know if PTSD could be ground for declaring you an unfit parent. And you told her? I told her it was impossible without evidence of actual unfitness, which she doesn't have. But Gabriel, Patricia leaned forward. She's desperate. Her life in Milwaukee isn't working out. She lost her job last month. She's behind on rent, and I think she's considering doing something drastic. Gabriel processed this information with the same methodical approach he used for all potential threats. Define drastic. She asked very specific questions about parental kidnapping laws. What would happen if she took Oliver out of state without permission? How long it would take for law enforcement to get involved? Whether she could claim you were abusive to justify her actions. Gabriel felt the familiar cold settle over him. The same emotional detachment that had served him well in combat situations. Did you advise her against this course of action? Of course. I also declined to represent her in any such matter. But Gabriel, she's not thinking clearly. She's lost everything. Her career, her home, her identity. Oliver is the only thing she has left. Oliver isn't a thing to be possessed, Gabriel said quietly. He's a child who needs stability. I know that. You know that. But Isabella is in crisis mode, and people in crisis make terrible decisions. Patricia pulled out a business card. This is a colleague of mine who specializes in family law enforcement. If Isabella does try something, you'll need legal representation immediately. Gabriel pocketed the card. Thank you for the warning. That evening, Gabriel called Rico while Oliver played video games in the living room. I need full surveillance on Isabella, Gabriel said. 24/7 monitoring, financial tracking, communication intercepts. She's planning something. How deep do you want me to go? As deep as necessary. If she tries to take Oliver, I want to know about it before she makes her move. Rico's report came 3 days later. Isabella had withdrawn her remaining savings, $3,847 in cash. She'd researched bus routes from Chicago to cities without extradition agreements with Illinois. Most tellingly, she'd purchased a prepaid cell phone and had been calling Oliver's school, asking detailed questions about security procedures and pickup protocols. Gabriel immediately contacted Oliver's principal, Mrs. Henderson, a sharp-eyed woman who'd run the elementary school for 15 years. I need to add some names to Oliver's authorized pickup list, Gabriel explained during their meeting. And I need to remove his mother temporarily. Mrs. Henderson raised an eyebrow. Is there a safety concern? Potentially. Isabella has been asking about school security, and I have reason to believe she might attempt to take Oliver without permission. Gabriel showed her the court documents establishing his primary custody. Until further notice, only I or my designated emergency contacts should be allowed to take Oliver from school. Of course, we'll update his file immediately and alert all staff. Mrs. Henderson made notes in Oliver's permanent record. Should we be concerned about pickup attempts after hours? Isabella knows our routine. She might try during lunch, recess, or field trips when security is more relaxed. Gabriel handed her Rico's business card. This is my security consultant. If you have any questions or concerns, call him immediately. Gabriel spent the weekend preparing Oliver for a potential crisis without frightening the boy. Remember our rule about going with other people? Gabriel asked as they worked on a puzzle together. Only go with you, Uncle Rico, or Mrs. Martinez from next door, Oliver recited. And only if they know the secret password. And if someone tries to make you go with them anyway, scream, fight, and run toward other grown-ups. Oliver looked up from the puzzle. Are you worried about something, Daddy? Gabriel ruffled his son's hair. Just being careful, soldier. Good fathers always have backup plans. The attempt came on Tuesday afternoon. Gabriel was in a client meeting when his phone buzzed with an emergency alert from the school. He excused himself and called Mrs. Henderson immediately. Isabella showed up during lunch recess, the principal reported. She told the playground supervisor she was here to pick up Oliver for a dentist appointment. When the supervisor asked for written authorization, Isabella became agitated and claimed there was a family emergency. Where is she now? Security walked her off the property. She kept insisting she had a right to see her son, but when we showed her the updated pickup restrictions, she left. Mrs. Henderson paused. Gabriel, she seemed unstable, angry and desperate. Is Oliver okay? He's fine. He was in the library during lunch, so he didn't see any of it. But Gabriel, I think you should consider involving the police. Gabriel was already walking to his truck. I'll be there in 10 minutes. He found Oliver in the principal's office, reading a book and seemingly unaware of the drama that had unfolded. Gabriel's heart clenched as he looked at his son, innocent, trusting, completely dependent on the adults in his life to keep him safe. Hey, soldier, ready to go home? Already? But I didn't finish my math worksheet. We'll finish it at home, Gabriel promised, helping Oliver gather his backpack. As they walked to the truck, Gabriel spotted Isabella's Honda parked across the street from the school. She was sitting behind the wheel, staring at them through the windshield. When she realized Gabriel had seen her, she started the engine and drove away. Gabriel made a decision that would determine the final outcome of his war with Isabella. Chapter 9. Endgame. Gabriel called 911 from the school parking lot, reporting attempted kidnapping and a violation of custody orders. By the time he and Oliver reached home, 2 police cruisers were waiting in their driveway. Mr. Torres? I'm Detective Sarah Williams. We need to discuss your ex-wife's behavior today. Gabriel invited the officers inside, while Oliver went to his room to work on homework. In the living room, Gabriel laid out the complete file he'd been building on Isabella's instability, the failed pickup attempt, her recent job loss, the legal consultation about changing custody, and the surveillance evidence of her planning. She's been escalating, Gabriel explained. First, the questions about my fitness as a parent, then researching parental kidnapping laws, now attempting to take Oliver from school without authorization. Detective Williams studied the documents. This is very thorough. You've been monitoring her activities? I have a private investigator on retainer. Given Isabella's history of deception and her recent desperate circumstances, I felt it was necessary to protect my son. We'll issue a warrant for her arrest, Detective Williams decided. Attempted kidnapping, violation of custody orders, and harassment. Do you have a current address? Gabriel provided Isabella's Milwaukee apartment information, knowing it was probably too late. Rico had reported that Isabella hadn't returned to her apartment since morning, and her car wasn't in its assigned parking space. The detective's radio crackled with an update. Isabella's Honda had been spotted at Chicago O'Hare Airport, abandoned in the long-term parking garage. Airport security was reviewing footage to determine if she'd boarded a flight. She's running, Gabriel realized. She knows she's burned all her bridges. But Gabriel had underestimated Isabella's desperation. At 9:47 p.m., while Oliver slept and Gabriel reviewed security footage with Rico, the power went out. The backup generator kicked in immediately, but Gabriel knew the outage wasn't coincidental. She's here, Gabriel told Rico, his voice deadly calm. Take Oliver to the safe room. Gabriel had converted the basement panic room during the divorce proceedings, installing it ostensibly for general security, but really in anticipation of this exact scenario. Rico swept Oliver from his bed and carried the sleepy boy downstairs while Gabriel armed himself and checked the perimeter. Isabella had learned some tradecraft during their marriage, absorbing Gabriel's security lessons through osmosis. She'd cut the power at the street transformer, approached through the neighbor's backyard, and disabled the rear motion sensors. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She didn't know about the infrared cameras Gabriel had installed after the divorce. Gabriel watched on his tablet as Isabella tried to jimmy the basement window she'd seen him use months earlier. She'd lost weight, making her more agile, and she moved with the desperation of someone who had nothing left to lose. Gabriel could have called the police, could have waited for backup, could have handled this through official channels. Instead, he chose to end it personally. He opened the basement door silently, moving through his own house like a ghost. Isabella was halfway through the window when Gabriel spoke. "Hello, Isabella." She spun around, losing her balance and falling into the basement in a tangle of limbs. Gabriel descended the stairs slowly, taking his time. "This is breaking and entering," Gabriel observed conversationally. "Also stalking, attempted kidnapping, and violation of a restraining order." Isabella struggled to her feet, her face wild with desperation. "I want my son. He's not your son anymore. You gave up that right when you chose strangers over your family." "I made mistakes," Isabella screamed. "People make mistakes. That doesn't mean I should lose my child forever." Gabriel studied her with clinical detachment. Isabella's hair was unwashed, her clothes wrinkled and stained. She'd lost more weight than was healthy, and her eyes had the manic gleam of someone who'd stopped sleeping regularly. "You didn't make mistakes, Isabella. You made choices. Deliberate, selfish choices over and over again for more than a year." Gabriel moved closer, backing her against the basement wall. "You chose to betray your marriage. You chose to traumatize Oliver. You chose to steal money to fund your affairs. And now you're choosing to become a criminal rather than accept the consequences of your actions. I'm his mother. You're a stranger who shares his DNA. A real mother protects her child, puts his needs first, creates stability and security." Gabriel's voice remained calm, but his eyes were hard as steel. "You've done none of those things. You've brought chaos and pain into his life at every opportunity." Isabella pulled a knife from her jacket, a small utility blade that would be more dangerous to herself than to Gabriel. I'm taking him with me. Tonight, I'll disappear, and you'll never find us. Gabriel almost smiled. Isabella, I spent 12 years hunting people who didn't want to be found. You lasted 6 hours as a fugitive before abandoning your car at the airport. You think you can hide from me with a 5-year-old in tow? I'll do whatever it takes. No, you won't. Because you're not willing to actually sacrifice for Oliver. You never were. Gabriel took another step forward, ignoring the knife. If you were really willing to do anything for him, you would have ended your affairs when he walked in on you and Trevor. You would have chosen your family over your selfish desires. You would have put his emotional well-being above your own pleasure. Isabella raised the knife, her hand shaking. Stay back. You want to know the truth, Isabella? Oliver doesn't ask about you anymore. He's happier without you. More secure, more confident, better adjusted. Gabriel's words hit her like physical blows. He's building a life based on honesty and stability, and you're not part of it. You're just a reminder of chaos and pain. That's not true. But Isabella's voice cracked, betraying her knowledge that Gabriel was right. Dr. Martinez says Oliver has been processing his trauma beautifully. He understands that adults sometimes make bad choices, and he's learned to recognize healthy relationships versus toxic ones. Gabriel was close enough now to take the knife away from her, but he didn't. He's learned that people who really love him don't lie to him, don't put him in danger, don't use him as a weapon in their personal wars. Isabella's arm dropped, the knife clattering to the concrete floor. I wanted to matter to someone. You mattered to Oliver. You mattered to me, but you threw that away for validation from strangers. Gabriel picked up the knife and slipped it into his pocket. And now you're going to prison. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Rico had called for backup the moment Isabella entered the house. They'll give you 3 to 5 years for attempted kidnapping. Gabriel continued conversationally. By the time you get out, Oliver will be 10 years old. He won't remember you clearly, and he'll have no interest in reconnecting with someone who tried to steal him from his father. Isabella collapsed against the basement wall, sliding down to sit on the cold floor. I've lost everything. Yes, you have. Because you chose short-term pleasure over long-term happiness. You chose lies over truth. You chose selfishness over sacrifice. Gabriel heard the police entering through the front door. And most importantly, you chose to see Oliver as your possession rather than your responsibility. Detective Williams appeared at the top of the basement stairs, followed by 2 officers with drawn weapons. She's unarmed, Gabriel called up, and ready to surrender. As the officers placed Isabella in handcuffs, she looked at Gabriel one last time. Will you tell Oliver I love him? Gabriel considered the question seriously. No, love is action, not words. If you loved him, you would have made different choices. He turned away as they led her upstairs. Actions have consequences, Isabella. Finally, after the police left and the house was secure, Gabriel found Oliver in the safe room, reading a book while Rico played on his phone. Is everything okay now, Daddy? Oliver asked without looking up from his story. Everything's fine, soldier. Mommy won't be bothering us anymore. Oliver nodded and returned to his book, accepting the news with the resilience that had carried him through his parents' divorce and his mother's abandonment. Gabriel watched his son read, thinking about the choices that had led them to this moment. Isabella would spend the next several years in prison, and when she was released, Oliver would be old enough to decide for himself whether he wanted a relationship with her. Gabriel suspected the answer would be no. Some betrayals couldn't be forgiven. Some trust, once broken, could never be repaired. And some people, when given the choice between their children's well-being and their own desires, would always choose themselves. Gabriel had learned those lessons in the Marines, where a single act of selfishness could get your entire squad killed. Now he'd taught them to his son, who would grow up understanding that loyalty, honesty, and sacrifice were the foundations of any meaningful relationship. Ready to go upstairs? Gabriel asked. Can we have hot chocolate? Oliver asked hopefully. Absolutely. As they climbed the basement stairs together, Gabriel reflected on the war he'd just won. Isabella was gone, Oliver was safe, and their life could finally move forward without the shadow of betrayal hanging over them. He'd kept his promise to himself and to his son. He'd never forgiven never forgotten, and never let those who betrayed his family escape the consequences of their choices. Some men might have called it ruthless. Gabriel called it justice. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.